So I would like to really thank Adriana. He's an incredible welcome in the city and in such an institution, and to all of you being here and accepting this invitation to come here to discuss from your perspective what are the kind of key issues for our cultural institutions. I will present a little bit the CCA. You are all aware of who we are and what we do, but I still thought that it would be good to go through as a kind of provocation of thoughts. Before even saying, like what is the CCA and what we're doing, I thought I will just give you some few facts. So the CCA is an international museum, and when we say is international, we mean even if it's based in Canada, we think it's international because of the character of its collection. So we collect not only Canadian architecture, but architecture that has coming from all over the world. Somehow our founder always says ideas have no geography. So this is the idea that is behind the collection, and also is the culture of the institution. I think a lot of the people who work there, as me, are actually coming from all over the world. And especially is also to introduce very different point of view. So this is also one of the reasons we started this program, and I will take some time after to explain it. This program that we have a curator in different countries as a way of deepening our understanding of other perspective around architecture and society. So this is the CCA, our museum. This is a photo that was taken by Naoya Takeyama, a Japanese photographer we work with. And we actually have a collection of photographers by photographers that they were always staying at this hotel and basically very near the museum, and they always take a photo of our museum from their hotel room. So the CCA, this is actually a card by Gordon Matta Clark that we have in our collection that I think summarize a bit like what is our way of thinking and what we can offer as an institution. So it's here is what we have to offer you in its most elaborate form. Confusion guided by a clear sense of purpose. So our way of working is very much the idea that we are a museum, so we use the means of a museum, so exhibition, publication, website, the collection, and so on, but we are also a research center. So the research component is very much the kind of guiding purpose of our institution. The CCA was founded by Phyllis Lambert, she's an architect, and she's the woman who invited Miss Van der Rohe to build the Seagram building in New York, and she has always been very passionate about architecture, and she founded in 1979. They took 10 years to build the institution, not only the building, but the collection, and so we are open to the public by 30 years. Clearly, our topic is architecture, but our purpose somehow, as it is in this card of Matta Clark, is to look at architecture not only as just built building, but look at architecture as a discipline can actually be in strong connection with society, with economy, and with political issues, and even inform them. And somehow we can look at society through the lens of architecture in itself. So how we do this is we think exhibition has as a kind of means, a tool for thematic explorations. And somehow in the last 15 years, we have selected carefully every year a topic that we think is fundamental for society to discuss and somehow validate how architecture is tackling these points and how architecture can contribute to this. So I will give you just a few examples for you to see this. So this was an exhibition that we did in 2005. It was called Sense of the City, and was really challenging the idea that architecture is not only, and especially urbanism, is not only a visual art, but it's actually very much about all the other sensorial aspect of it, like the smell, the surfaces of things, the all kind of capacity that architecture has in delivering the experience. So this is something that now is very normal, probably. 15 years ago, there were not so many people who actually worked on this topic. So this is another characteristic of CCA. We try, or we want to be a little bit ahead and sort of like use our topics to provoke a different reflection on the discipline and in general. In 2007, we did an exhibition that was called Sorry Out of Gas. This is actually President Carter, who during the crisis in 1973 decided to install on the White House solar panels. So in 2007, that actually was like before then the crisis of the Lehman Brothers, but we had the kind of energetic crisis. There was a lot of discussion about green architecture, sustainable architecture, and what we thought was like, it would be interesting to go back to the crisis of 1973 and look how architecture actually had responded to that crisis. And it was incredible to discover that basically a completely different future was laid out for us. So passive solar, active solar, solar panels, like all the kind of ideas that we have now, they already appeared in those years. And somehow, because the oil price went down again, we sort of got rid of this, because obviously this other would have asked for a radical change in behavior and in culture. So somehow it was our way of showing this kind of other future that we have missed out, and show all the kind of architecture that was even thought at that time. In 2008, we looked at like a kind of bottom-up architecture, so how you can imagine to empower citizens or empower new forms of urban action that might imply the presence of an architect or not even. Like, for example, what you see on a table, this is a group, a kind of guerrilla group in Toronto that they call the city if they want like a bike path to be built, and the city will say, well, we have to go through process, we have to, I don't know, will take some months and so on. And so what they do at night, they go and they kind of like spray the bike path by themselves, and somehow people do not understand, they are not legal, and so they get used as and so on. So when we did this show, actually many journalists came to us saying, well, you are, as an institution, you are inspiring illegal acts, and you are kind of like empowering people to do this. So, but at the same time, it was really an exhibition that tried to provoke this question of like, which is the power, who is governing the city? You as a citizen can come up with projects and ideas, how much you have to be implied and so on, or how much you can push those agenda of new forms of living together somehow. In 2010, we worked on a show that was actually about immigration. And the way we wanted to work on it was to not tackle the fact that borders and human questions and so on. So we actually worked about on the idea that architecture travel from one place to another because people travel and ideas travel. So tech idea of how you will build, how you will do agriculture, how you will move this technique related to architecture, but also way of thinking and living. And so it was interesting because it was an exhibition about migration, but the human was not there, even if it was always there. So for example, you know that passports have colors, and if you have a blue passport, you might pass before, let's say, a green passport or a red passport and so on. So as soon as we give a passport, we are clearly defined. Probably my European passport is not good in this moment. So, but this means that we actually define a lot of borders and migration and decision that are actually defining the kind of movement and the possibility of exchanges. One of the stories in the old exhibition was told with a series of stories. And one of the stories that we had was actually the landscape designer Gilles Clément, who suggested to me this, that in the south of France, a bird that is considered a non-French bird was actually decided to be killed because it's eating the eggs of the local birds. And this bird is actually the contemporary version of the ibis that in old Egypt was the sucker bird. So we had a mummified bird, ibis, coming from the Brooklyn Museum. And so the idea was like a bird that in one culture in a time was considered a sucker, now has considered a bird that has to be killed. And so somehow through this, we were challenging all this idea of like what is nation, what is a border, and places. In 2012, we worked with Jean-Louis Cohen on an exhibition that was called Architecture in Uniform that was very much about the ethics, so was really covering the war, Second World War, and was looking at what were the role of architects during that period. If they were against, if they work for the dictatorship, if they were documenting. So what you see here is actually an incredible box of models of boats, because Times Magazine asked an American architect to sort of like, let's say, illustrate how the war was happening and how, you know, the war between Japan and US. And so this was all built by him, and basically the boats were used to create a scene that will be photographed and then presented through the magazine. But somehow the show wanted really to challenge what are the role of architects during tough political time where you have to decide, do you work for the power who is in let's say, a power like military or dictatorship and so on. In 2007, we worked on the idea of e-learning somehow. We went back again in the past. This is an experiment that BBC and Open University did in the 70s, where they decided that they had to kind of like grow the level of education of all the English population. So on BBC One at 8 o'clock at night, everybody will have History of Architecture. And it was an incredible course where everybody will learn about it. And then if you want to do this as a diploma, you can even enroll and so on. So for us it was very interesting because somehow this idea of online learning is something that we discuss a lot today. And it is actually, what is this form of learning? And the very interesting approach of Open University is that their focus was not so much about how you teach, that I think is very much in what is happening now with this e-learning, but is more about how you learn. And so how you have to teach in order that a person learn. And imagine this was a class that was open to all the population. So you had, housewives, people in prison, anybody can look at that. So how you form even idea what architecture is through this class. It's an amazing course that still exists, and we actually republished it and was taken and followed. I think is the most successful things that we have done at CCA that is not even produced by us and is 30 years old, is still very much followed. This is a show we did in 2012 and was really about the idea of health, and we looked at 5 things that we thought in that moment were crucial to discuss and understand what was again the relation of architecture and through these issues. The idea of medicalization comes from the idea that things that are not a medical issue, but they might become medicalized, they might become treated as a medical issue. And so somehow we thought that was a bit scary, the fact that architecture started to be conceived also as a way of of healing or as a way of curing and so on. Here I will explain you a little bit more, just to make you understand a little bit more our approach. This is actually an advertisement that Leo Burnett in 2016 put out with Marlboro, and it's very powerful in this idea of you decide. So one of the issues that we had with this exhibition was to say more and more we treat our bodies as will be, I would say, simplifying our cars. So it's your responsibility to take care of your body. You have to exercise, you have to not drink, eat well, and so on. So more and more, the idea that there is an institution or a welfare system that take care of you is disappearing. More and more we go towards an individualistic society, so it's your responsibility. And scary enough is that more and more, at least in the North America where I live, insurance will not take you in if you don't actually take care of yourself properly. So more and more we will have a kind of form of, I will not say eugenetics, but let's say if you don't demonstrate the willingness of being active and well, the system will not take care of you. So this is a photo that we have in our collection of Olmstead Park in Central Park. And somehow, from a moment where the park, this is in those periods of the creation of the city, they were considered the lung of the city. So somehow a green space that will actually help a population to go out from a kind of industrial and polluted space. We now are reducing more and more this to this kind of idea of simply facades and really wishing for a kind of biodiversity, but still reducing those spaces in a kind of limited way. But we also believe that nature is a kind of healing possibility. But more and more we know that the nature is actually polluted in itself. So just to go back to nature thinking that will solve us, all our problem is not the case. And more we have people who have this terrible allergies that is like you are allergic to everything. So this we know now in these days very well. So these animals that they were part of our environment, they are now becoming the vessels of our sickness. And so this, for example, is a group of sculpture that we actually commissioned to an artist who I discovered because he worked with Isabella Rossellini in a beautiful film where she's actually it's called green porno, and she's actually having sex with big insects that are all paper one. And so I asked him if he could have worked with us and produced these animals that were in scale to one in the exhibition. So the exhibition had this feeling of like people will come and see, oh, how cute they're animals, and then they will understand that actually they are the origin of our sickness. But also, we start to have this invisible landscapes that is actually, this is a work by an architect, Nera Caviglio, who document and visualize the kind of pollution. So this new landscape that are actually the invisible polluted one that are actually at this point part of our cities. All the things we accumulate, this is an amazing work by Bas Prinsen of Cairo, where people are actually collecting the garbage, and the city just exists to have actually the space to kind of like put all this garbage in. And so is also the economy of things that start to produce very weird urban situation and ultimately potentially having the city becoming a sick place. But the show was not only depressing in those terms, but also tried to also challenge the fact that things like this one, this is something that the Bloomberg, the mayor of New York at that time, put out this book with the willingness of really making, especially fighting the kind of obesity epidemics. And so trying to understand how architecture can contribute to enhance, let's say, physical activity and so on. So suddenly we start to see a lot of staircase projects where the, let's say, the elevator are hidden and so on. So obviously we start to divide the world in bodies that have different form and capacities. This is actually a same chair that Sana, the architect in Japan, developed for the Japanese market and for the American market. So somehow our criticism to this attitude of like using architecture as a medicine was to say that in doing this you have a very short term way of looking at it. First of all, you start to again to divide, and if you only have a staircase, you will start to divide the people who can take the staircase and the one cannot take the staircase. So you start to segregate even more the able and the unable one. So it's not what all our argument was. Architecture should care for people, but should not imagine to cure people. So there was this slightly different take on it. The topic of aging also was part of it. This is a city you might know in Arizona. Sun City is actually one of the first experiments for elderly people. So it's a city that you can go live only at that time. At the time when it was founded, you had to at least 55 years old. Young people can only come for 1 day. So the main thing is that you don't even have to see youth so that you don't feel old. Anyhow, it's a very strange experiment that where houses are all organized in a way that there is no effort for you. So this, for example, is an experiment that MIT did to actually design a dress that is basically giving you the body of a 75 years old average person. So you will able to design things considering what is the maximum stretch of an arm or a legs that a person can do. Again, we thought this was helpful on one side, terrifying on another one, because it means, again, introduce the idea of no friction, and somehow like assuming that all the old population should already age even younger. So we were more interested in very simple devices like this project that was done in the Netherlands. And the idea of his is a house for old people, and somehow the design of this door as a door that can open and can actually enhance a kind of the idea of openness and conversation, we thought was what architecture can do, that can think in detail and every very simple parts of the buildings in a way that will think about this emotionally and psychological exchange. Or things even ironic as let's say a cushion that you will carry around with you, but that you can like parasiting any surfaces if you want to sit. The other things we wanted to challenge is that architecture has often this idea that we found the perfect material. So this that you think is a nice soft heel is actually an asbestos mine of a city of, it's even called Asbestos in near Montreal. And so asbestos, that was considered at one point the kind of best material, turned out to be what we know extremely cancerogen. So we were also very wanted to be very cautious that architects often in this idea of producing something new, they get in love with things that somehow there might be also on the long term a kind of health hazard. So that was part of the show, with also this kind of neon that were like alarming you about all the kind of things. And the overall sentiment of the exhibition was very much about you will not know if this was good for you or will actually be a kind of hazard. Recently, we decided to, and then I think this is what we will see also after, briefly, a short movie that we did related to this exhibition to continue this idea of health, even more pushed on this idea of well-being. And so we did last year an exhibition about happiness. And it all started with the idea that in 2008, with the crisis, the economical crisis that hit at least our part of the world and Europe very hard, many people, and actually I think it was Macron, the first person who said we cannot measure anymore the well-being of a country using the GDP. So the only things that can really say if a country is in good shape is about the well-being and the wealth, the health, and the mind health and happiness of their inhabitants. This is a photo actually that was taken by chance, let's say, by a photographer 2 days before in London. This are the actual Lehman Brothers headquarters. 2 days before that, we all knew that the things collapsed, and so they were probably called in emergency meeting, and the photographer stopped and didn't understood why all these people were lining up for that. So then we discovered. And so the show was looking about this kind of new relation between this anxiety and investment things, and and on the other side, this idea of happiness that comes out as a way of coping with this. And so many sociologists and economists say this idea of happiness is a new form of capitalism again. So if you're happy, you produce even more. And so that will be the new goal. And so somehow, again, we looked at like, what is the role of architecture in this, and how should architecture take on this agenda of happiness and so on. So I don't remember where Argentina stands. This is actually the happiness index. This was 2017. This was like rotating as will be the stock exchange, but basically you see that the 10 countries that are always up are always the kind of same countries. And so somehow the movie we will see after is about of like who is deciding which are the data and let's say the rules and who fix the reason why you should be happy or not. And this somehow is again a new form of control. And clearly things are dealing with safety, with access to work, access to education, and so on. And so somehow you see these are the first 10, and then clearly, let's say, then there are from 100 on is all countries that will, through this data, will never make it to the top. So the show was analyzing what will be this architectural well-being. We commissioned architects also to design an idea of cities that will be in relation to what we think happiness is. These are basically some of the things that you're supposed to do to be happy every day. But also we looked at this idea of happiness as an idea of branding. So here you have the case of the city of Copenhagen, where the whole idea is that you bike and then you have a certain aesthetic of the bars, the cafe, and so on. And somehow now there is even a company that is called Copenhagen Eyes that you can hire here also in Buenos Aires. And they will tell you what you have to do to become happy as Copenhagen. But somehow, again, this is absurd, because then we will just end up being all the same place and so on. So all our shows, they deals with this idea also of like really provoke a question and provoke, especially in the practice, a reflection of like how you should stand against this kind of agenda that somehow is proposed to us. And this one of happiness is very difficult to refuse, because I don't think there is an architect who wants to do a set building. So it's not easy to deal with this. The last question of the show was like, who decide this ranking? That are, let's say, the editor of Monocle or the editor of the economists who decide which are the safest city in the world, they are becoming the designers more the designers. So it was really kind of provoking this question. The next show we are working on is called Apart Together, A New Society, and really look at like how all the kind of things that we have built our society upon, family, the way the idea of ownership, the way we live and so on, are sort of like falling apart or transforming, and how architecture is now dealing with this. This is a work by an American photographer who has followed the story of several women that they decided, or they cannot have kids, but they decide to have a doll that they bring around with them all time, and it's called Mother Forever. So the kid has always 6 months, and you will be a mother of 6 months old forever. So this will open in November, so stay tuned. I will try to be a little bit more fast because I think I'm eating a lot of time maybe. So the second thing for us important is the collection. And we consider the collection a tool. So we always say our institution is strengthened by the collection. The curatorial work that we do, as you have seen, sometimes is using our collection, sometimes is initiating new ideas that the collection then acquire. So if we work on health or we work on early environmental ideas, then the collection team do research and then acquire things, while the exhibition team has done a lot of research to lay out what are the interesting things to collect. So the way we work is not the traditional way where it will be an acquisition, then there is an work on that, then there is an exhibition and a book. We try to kind of change this mechanism. These are our archives. These are where all the photos are kept. It's also a photo album. These are more like prints and drawings. And what we think is really this, is the fact that it's not that the collection is important per se, but is really the use that is done of the collection that establishes value. And it's also the nature of our collection. So obviously we have beautiful drawings, but as I said, the main goal of our institution is research, is to provoke new ideas, is to have people really use the collection to come up with more thoughts and more ideas. This, for example, is a book that we have, is actually a book that Frank Lloyd Wright wrote in 1945. So this is When Democracy Builds. And this is a copy, when it was published, then Frank Lloyd Wright, so this is his copy and his annotation, started to change it for the second edition. So what we have in the collection is his annotated version. So we know what are the things that he wanted to change, why he wanted to rework a certain concept, and so on. So this is the quality of our collection. Or these are, for example, cards by Le Corbusier, where he tried to spatialize a plan for a client in a way that a person who will not understand a plan of architecture will be able to understand. These are research material of, for example, Spiro Kostov, who wrote the book History for Architecture in 1985. So we have all this material that he used to collect to actually design the book. This is Judith Perlman, who did a first oral history of the work of, for example, Bauhaus in America. So we have all her videotapes, all the audio tapes, and so on. So our collection is very much about, having all this research material that people can use to do scholar work or projects. So the archive are sometimes architects' archives, sometimes are historian archives or critics' archive or other kind of writers who work on architecture. These are photos, for example, of James Sterling. We have his archive. So this is like his research on Muse, and this is actually his own project in England in the 50s. So we also have material that is about what the architects have looked at and what they were interested in. But also we have all kind of correspondence. This is in the Gordon Matta Clark archive. This is a letter that he wrote to a gentleman actually inquiring about explosive that he wanted to use for his of his work. So he's inquiring how he can use, if he can know a little bit more about all this so that he will be able to perform his destructions in a more efficient way. This is a questionnaire by Terry Price that was intended to be given to the people who will come to the Fan Palace, the famous building that he never built, and that you will have to fill out to then give feedback to what was the programming that should happen. So it's very funny that you know, his this idea of do you suffer from, or does the past of all these things concern you? So somehow was also interesting in a kind of pre-digital world that you will actually have this system of feedback towards also this kind of more emotional component. The photography collection is very large at CCA, is 65,000 photos that start from very early photography. This is an early photo of the Parliament in London under construction. It's 1858. The earliest photo we have is really from 1839, so really the beginning of photography. And so the collection is about the history of photography at the same time as a kind of history of architecture through the use of photography. We have these amazing panoramas of Felice Beato. We have many albums of these. This is early 1874, Yokohama on the top and Osaka on the bottom. Transformation of European cities. This is Dortmund in the 30s with a kind of like fog and heavy industrial condition. So somehow the photography collection for us is more a collection that will help a scholar or a researcher to understand what was the context of the, if they're looking at a project of a German architect in the 30s, this is the city where the architect was working on. But also very recent work. This is a photo by Takashi Homma that we have commissioned on in Chandigarh in India in 2013, and we are still working with him in taking photos of Le Corbusier in a kind of thorough way. The library is also amazing. This is Serlio, early book from 1475. But we also collect things like this one, like a maquette that Vignelli did for the first, for the issue or the series of oppositions. Or we have the maquette of small, medium, large, extra large of Ramkula. So we're interested in things that maybe didn't make it at the end. But somehow you start to see how the design was thought and so on. These are things, again, amazing of drawings of Il Cronaca of 1485 or sketches by Le Corbusier from Cabanon. We have archive now around 200, so it means the whole work of an architect. So, as I said, Terry Price, Aldo Rossi, most recently Alvaro Siza. This is a very nice sketch of the building in Berlin, or the archive of John Haydock. So as I said, all this for us is actually to establish a kind of field of research. So what we do is we never have these things just in the walls. We try to invent all kind of program to activate the use of them. So recently we worked on a series of exhibition that we have now done in several series. So the first one was with Ábalos Herreros. We have their archive. We invite 3 group of architects to come and look at the material that goes from digital drawing to piles of drawings and slides. So this was in 2015. office, Kirsten David and David Van Severen, Juan Castellon, and then Sohail, they all came. It's also an opportunity to have all these people discussing the archive. They have all very different point of view, and somehow their idea then become 3 exhibitions. So this was the one by office that was really working on the plan and the idea that if you look at their architecture in plan, you see a kind of, let's say, they call it industrialization, but somehow that the kind of typologies come back over and over. Juan Castellon really looked at kind of thermodynamics and things that would be more related to sustainability in their early work. And Sohail looked at the idea of collages and landscape and so on. So the visitor is exposed to different point of view on the archive and very different material at the same time. So it's actually a quick series of exhibition. And in this moment, we are working on Mata Clark. So this is Jan Chatenier, then we had Ila Peleg, and actually now we have Kitty Scott. So the archive of Mata Clark, Jan Chatenier worked on his books. We have his library. So through the looking at actually what he was interested in, you can actually make a connection between the book that he was reading and the work of art he was producing. So these are some shots of like a very nice work of Mata Clark that we have, that was his obsession with this pipeline. The second show looks at all the movies and actually at all the outtakes, the ones that didn't make it in the movie. So again, an incredible amount of new documentation. And actually this project also helped us to digitize a lot of our material, because through this research project, we then identify parts of the collection that we didn't maybe digitize yet, that would be great to do it for the exhibition, but then online for the public. And the current one actually look at his photography, his travel photography. So all the things that he was interested in while traveling. So somehow we think that the archives, they are alive, they become interesting if someone is looking at them and project a kind of different point of view. So another program that we created is called Find and Tell. So this is Peter Testa, for example, looking at the sketchbook of Caesar. So we invite scholars, architects to stay in residency at the CCA and deciding, one subject, and they have access, they can look at whatever they want. And then they create an argument, and then through that arguments, we then digitize a large body of material, and then we put it online together with their essay or their explanation. Then you have Michael Meredith looking at Hajduk, or Inderbeer looking at Van Ginkel, a Canadian archive. The other things we want to do with our work is staying in dialogue with what are the practice working in this moment. So on one side, we take a topic and we sort of like work and propose to practice or urban designer or anyhow our public to reflect on this topic. On the other side, we take a topic that we think practices are working on that can be interesting to expose. And we do this in dialogue. We find that this dialogue are more productive than a kind of monographic approach. So here we put together Philippe Ram and Gilles Clément on the question of environment. Here we have the idea of progress with Michael Molson, Alessandro Poli was part of Super Studio, and Greg Lean. The idea of urban living with the work of Nishizawa in Tokyo and the work of Stephen Taylor in London, the idea of interior with Umberto Riva and Bijoy Jain, and more recently, the idea of history with Office and Go Asegawa. And all the time, the exhibition is also designed by them. So somehow, for us, is a question of like, we should not only collect archive and the ideas of like past architects or even contemporary architects through the work they have done, but showing their process is a way of also showing and collecting their ideas while they are information. And they, in this case, because the topic was history, they looked in our collection and pulled out things that were related to their work. The next one that is happening in a few months is actually with, it's about context and how an architect even define what the context is, and is with the Hong Kong-based architect rural urban framework and the Belgian 51N4E. So ultimately, I just want to share the kind of dual things that I think all of our institutions are dealing with, that is the offline, actually what is happening in your physical museum and what is happening online. And we are, we are based in Montreal, in a very cold country. And I have to say, the first years when I came, I really tried to understand like how we can get more visitors and so on. But at the same time, I start to understand that we play a role that goes beyond the location where we are. And so the question for us is like how we can stay relevant and how we can be interesting also for people who will actually might not never come to see us. And this is why we are doing a lot of work that is going out from our location, both online and with programs like the one we are starting here in Buenos Aires. So this will be a typical things that we do at CCA. We do seminars with a collection, with scholars. We pull out the material, we have discussion. This happens every week with different universities and so on. But this is also the reason why we started this, and here we have Martine in a blonde version. This program that is called CO, Care Of. Kayoko Ota is in Japan, so she's still our curator there for few months still. So the whole idea is that we are not really building a new, it's not a kind of a strategy as will be the Guggenheim that now start to do things everywhere. We actually have a brain that in this case is Martin Huberman, that work with us, but then also connect what is happening here, what are our preoccupations, but also push us to think about things that we will not think with our North American perspective. So that is really push topics and preoccupation that we might not have. At the same time, it is an opportunity for a place like Buenos Aires to rethink how you even tell a story to be explained to a public that at this point is a general public that might be the public who follow the CCA, might be in Tokyo, in London, or here. So it's an interesting exercise. With Kayoko, we did several projects that happened in Tokyo, but also they lived online. That are contributing to this public relation that we have in terms of like what are the things that are important to discuss today. The other things we are doing, as Adriana mentioned, is a series of documentaries. Again, for different reasons, we are exploring. One is what I told you about the public, but so how we can reach a public that might not be located in Montreal. But also is to exploring curatorial formats that, as an institution, we can use to tackle certain issue. So it is demonstrated that if we will be here talking about, let's say, homeless, or you see, or you read an article, you read a book, or you see an exhibition, actually, if you see a documentary on the same topic, you might shift your way of thinking, probably more easily than if I tell you a story. So this is why we decided that documentary is a way of provoking certain issues or provoking certain questions to have people shift their way of thinking after they have seen it. At least this is our desire and impact. So this is a trio. The first one is about homelessness, and we did it in Los Angeles, in Vienna, for a different reason. Los Angeles because it's at the core of the crisis, and Vienna because it is still a city that has a very strong social and affordable housing policy, but still they have a lot of homeless in town. So how we deal with that, with this, and so on. The second one will be about singletons. So more and more part of a global population is living alone. So what it means, what is this city where there will be more individuals than family or a group of people living together. And the third one will be about aging and new form also of companionship and new form of like how we deal with that. So it's looking at the city and looking of like which we think are the three populations that are making pressure to reconsider the way we live, and somehow that are not always considered to change the fact that this population should not always be considered as an exception, but more and more will become the normality. So the website, what we do is our main place. Mirko Zardini was our director for many years, defined that as the second building. So we have a first building that is in Montreal, and the website is our second building. So we don't intend to enlarge the first building. So the Montreal building stays very small and contained. What we want to enlarge is the second one. So it's more a magazine, let's say, it's intended to be. So every week there is a different cover and a different sets of articles. You can search everything. So we are one of the first places where you don't have a distinction between the collection, what we do, a lecture, and so on. You put something inside there and you have everything, means like the curatorial work we have done, what we have in the collection, what we have in the library. If there is a book that you can even buy, is all in one search, and it is also organized visually. This, I think, I just wanted to give you these ideas because I think the book that we will discuss, that will be the prompt of the discussion that we have with all the other institutions, and I'm really keen on hearing all your, how you position yourself on this, is actually this museum is not enough. That is the first edition, but we want to continue that, and should not be only a place for CCA to express. The idea is to welcome, through a set of topics, other institutions will then contribute to this, to create this discussion about what is the role of the institution. And somehow we say that just to be a museum is not enough, and so what we have to do more. I think the idea is that I will show you briefly just this movie that we did for the happiness show. It's called Now Please Think About Yesterday. And this is also part of what we do as an exhibition. We do a lot of new commissions and new research work. So this, just to tell you briefly, we went to Gallup, that is the biggest data agency, collecting agency in the States. They are actually the one in charge to create the happiness poll in the world. And so the interesting things is like, which are the questions you ask, how are ranked, how you come up with the idea if a population is happy or not. The founder of Gallup was very keen in this, because he's basically, you will see at the beginning of the movie, he will explain why the happiness ranking is the only way to understand if a country is really solid or not. Thanks a lot.
National statistics that we're used to are things like GDP, unemployment, and household income. That's what leaders rely on in order to make decisions. Those three things tell us what people spend, whether or not they're employed, and how much they make. But what it doesn't tell us is how people feel. And that's a problem. Here's why it's a problem. Brexit shocked the world. And when we look back at traditional economic indicators, we knew two things. GDP was growing. In fact, the quarter before Brexit happened, GDP grew at 2%. Unemployment dropped below 5% for the first time after the global economic crisis. All traditional economic indicators in the UK told us that things were okay. But they didn't tell us how people felt. This trend tells us how people felt. That drop was one of the single largest drops Gallup has ever seen in our decade of tracking in over 150 countries. Now here's one more that hits a little more close to home. It's the United States. And we know what GDP looked like in the lead up to the US election. And the media told us that the economy was getting better. Unemployment dropped down to around 5%. How did people feel? Well, this is what they told Gallup. These data are the lowest point we've seen in our history of 10 years of tracking in the United States.
Hi, this is Jessica with the National Gallup Poll. How are you doing today? Good. Well, I'm not telling you anything today. We're doing one of our weekly polls, and I was just wondering if I could include your opinions for that. Alright, fantastic. Thank you for your time today. This interview will be recorded for internal quality assurance. All things considered, how satisfied are you with your life as a whole these days? Use a 0 to 10 scale, where 0 is dissatisfied and 10 is satisfied. Okay. And did you experience anger during a lot of the day yesterday? I'm sorry, can you give me a yes or a no? Okay. And did you experience depression during a lot of the day yesterday? Yes or no? Okay. And did you experience enjoyment during a lot of the day yesterday? Okay, thank you. Did you experience happiness during a lot of the day yesterday? I can't really explain the question or define it for you. It's up to your interpretation. Would you like me to put a yes or no for did you experience happiness during a lot of the day yesterday?
The definition of happiness gets very philosophical and very controversial. So we engaged a lot of these well-being experts like Danny Kahneman, like Angus Deaton, like Deepak Chopra, for example, to help us best understand in terms of what we should be measuring. We have so many different components on measuring this concept of happiness that depending on what a world leader believes is actually happiness, their own subjective belief, they can use any of these indicators in order to determine whether or not people are happy or not in their particular country.